Some power hides behind uniforms, others behind silence. On a quiet Georgia road, two officers pulled over a lone black woman, expecting obedience. She looked ordinary, calm voice, no badge in sight. But Alana Brooks wasn't just another driver. They planted drugs in her trunk, laughed as they cuffed her, and dragged her into the station on false charges. To them, it was just another setup, but within hours, their smirks would vanish. Because Alana was the director of the DEA, and by arresting her, they didn't just make a mistake. They cracked open the system that had protected them for years. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The morning air was heavy with the kind of stillness that made everything feel paused between breaths. A soft mist hovered just above the road, casting a gentle veil over the forest-lined highway as Alana Brooks guided her silver sedan through the curves of the Georgia back roads. Her window cracked just enough to invite the scent of damp pine and fresh asphalt into the cabin. It had rained the night before, and the pavement still wore the sheen of it, glistening in the overcast light that bled through the clouds like a sky reluctant to fully wake. She wasn't dressed for attention. Gray zip-up, navy jeans, hair pulled into a low bun, no badge, no motorcade. Her phone was silenced in the cup holder beside her coffee, untouched since she'd pulled out of her sister's driveway earlier that morning. The trip had been long overdue. 3 days away from Washington, surrounded by warm family noise, homework at the kitchen table, and late-night laughter with her niece over card games and peach cobbler that didn't come from a city bakery, but a real oven in a real home. For a while, the title she carried back in D.C. hadn't mattered, and that was the point. Here, she wasn't a public figure or a federal name on a letterhead, just Aunt Alana, thoughtful and present, folding laundry and dancing to old music in socks that slid too easily across hardwood floors. As the road stretched out before her, empty and unhurried, she glanced down at her dashboard. No missed calls, no urgent notifications, just the slow rhythm of a weekend ending. Her fingers tapped gently against the steering wheel in time with the low hum of soul music drifting from the stereo. A Marvin Gaye track playing soft enough not to distract, but steady enough to anchor the mood. That was when she saw it, the subtle glint of a cruiser's grille in her rearview mirror, too close and too quiet to be casual. At first, she assumed it would pass, another patrol car making rounds in a quiet county with little else to do on a Monday morning. But it didn't. It held its position, matching her pace, its presence deliberate and patient, like someone watching through a one-way glass. She slowed slightly, checking her speed. 43 in a 45. No sudden movements. No swerving. She signaled toward the right shoulder to let them pass, but they remained in her lane. When the lights finally came, they flickered without urgency. No siren, no urgency in their flash, just a quiet assertion of power, blue and red dancing in her mirrors with an unspoken message. Pull over. Now. She eased the sedan onto the gravel shoulder, her signal still blinking dutifully as the engine quieted. With practiced calm, she placed both hands on the wheel, her posture straight, her eyes forward. This wasn't her first traffic stop, not by any stretch, and certainly not her first encounter with the kind of authority that liked to ask questions first and apologize, if ever, later. But she also knew how this played. Respect, compliance, composure. Still, something in her chest tightened as the officers approached. One to her window, the other lingering behind the rear of her car, angling to watch her blind spot. The one at her window, a white man with a square jaw and sun-worn skin, knocked twice on the glass with 2 fingers, not impatiently, but with the kind of confidence that implied he expected immediate obedience. She lowered the window halfway, her face expressionless, her tone measured. "Good morning, officer. Is there a reason I was stopped?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly as he examined her face, then dropped his gaze to her hands, still resting calmly on the wheel. "License and registration," he said. His voice was dry, edged with a casual hostility, wrapped in fake politeness. "Routine patrol." "You were drifting a little bit." "I wasn't aware of any drifting," she replied. "But I'll get you what you need." She moved slowly, deliberately, opening her glove box with her right hand and retrieving the neatly folded registration papers, then reaching for her wallet. Her movements were smooth, intentional, respectful, but also unmistakably familiar, like choreography memorized from years of knowing that being careful could be the difference between going home and not. As she handed him her license and registration, the second officer, a younger man with a broad chest and a mean edge in his posture, stepped closer to the rear of the vehicle, arms crossed, eyes scanning the interior. The older officer studied her license, his brow tightening as he read the information. "D.C. address," he muttered more to himself than to her. "You visiting?" "Family," she replied, still calm. He lingered with her ID a moment longer than necessary, then straightened and motioned subtly to his partner. "Pop the trunk," he said. Alana didn't move. "Is that a request, or are you giving a lawful order?" she asked, her voice still steady, though firmer now. The second officer shifted again, one hand resting near the baton on his belt, the other inching just slightly closer to the holster on his hip. "You got something in there we need to be worried about?" he asked, his voice laced with mock suspicion. "I know what's in my trunk," she said, "and I'd like to understand the basis for searching it." "Ma'am, we don't need to argue," the first one said, still holding her ID. "You can either comply now, or we do it the hard way." A long moment passed. Alana pressed the button beneath the dash. The trunk released with a soft click, rising slowly. The younger officer walked back toward it, disappearing from her view. She remained still, staring straight ahead, as the older officer lingered by her window, expression unreadable. Silence stretched out around them. Then the younger officer returned, holding a small, clear plastic bag pinched between two fingers. It was filled with a pale, powdery substance. "Well now," he said, lifting it where she could see. "Guess you forgot to pack this properly." Alana didn't blink. "That wasn't in my trunk. You sure about that?" "I'm sure." The older officer leaned closer, his breath stale and voice low. "Lady, you're not in D.C. anymore. You keep playing smart. We'll make this real uncomfortable." Alana turned her head slowly toward him, her eyes calm but sharp with intent, her voice unwavering. "I know my rights, and I'm invoking them now. I do not consent to this search, and I want legal representation. You've just presented an item that wasn't in my vehicle moments ago, and this is now a formal accusation." The older officer raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitching into something between amusement and condescension. "Now she wants a lawyer," he said, glancing back at his partner. "You hear that, Trent? Got ourselves a law professor." Trent let out a short, joyless laugh, the kind that didn't mask the tension already creeping into the situation. Or maybe she's just nervous. Guilty folks talk a lot. "I'm not guilty," Alana replied, her voice level, her gaze unflinching as she looked between them. "And if either of you had confidence in this arrest, you wouldn't need to mock me to cover your misconduct. You know this is unlawful, and so do I." The older officer stepped forward, closing the distance between them as he leaned down just enough to make his presence feel heavy. "That tone of yours," he muttered, his jaw tightening as he looked her up and down. "You keep it up and we'll add obstruction to your file. You think you're somebody special, but out here, people learn real quick that a badge means you follow directions. Alana didn't move, didn't blink, didn't allow so much as a breath to betray the fire rising in her chest. She kept her hands steady, still resting on the steering wheel in plain view. Then follow the law and call for a supervisor. Any further interaction without one is a direct violation of your department's own policy. The moment hung between them, brittle and hot, before the older officer finally stepped back, his face hardening with a kind of resolve that didn't look like justice. It looked like resentment. "Step out of the car," he said again, this time lower, tighter, the pretense of courtesy gone. "No," she answered, her voice still composed, but firmer now. "Not without a supervisor on scene. You have no right to search me, no cause to arrest me, and you're holding a bag of powder you didn't find in my car." That was when the performance ended. The older officer reached inside, unlocked the door from the inside panel, and yanked it open, grabbing her arm with the kind of force that made his intentions clear. Trent moved in at once, reaching across her to undo the seatbelt and drag her out of the vehicle. Their grips coordinated like they'd done this before. Because they had. They didn't read her rights. They didn't pause to explain the charges. They didn't slow down to log the evidence. They just pulled her from her seat like someone who needed to be reminded of her place. Her feet hit the pavement hard as they forced her toward the rear of her car. Her wrists were yanked behind her back, the handcuffs clinking cold against bone, cinched tighter than necessary. Not because they had to be, but because someone wanted them to hurt. She didn't resist, but she didn't make it easy either. Her spine remained straight, her chin lifted, and her voice didn't rise. But when she spoke again, it carried the weight of someone who knew exactly what was happening. "This is unlawful. I have complied with every order. I've offered no threat, no resistance, and the evidence you're claiming was not in my trunk. I demand your badge numbers and the name of your supervisor." Neither of them responded. They walked her to the cruiser in silence, pushing her forward with deliberate, almost performative indifference. She could feel the cold stares from passing vehicles slowing to catch a glimpse of what they believed was just another routine arrest. A woman in cuffs, placed there by the people they'd been taught to trust. No one knew who she really was. That anonymity, in this moment, was a cruel kind of freedom for them, and a dangerous one for her. The younger officer opened the back door and motioned for her to duck inside. She didn't argue. She bent down and stepped in, the cuffs pressing into her back as she sat rigidly against the molded plastic seat. The door slammed shut behind her with a finality that didn't echo. It just settled around her like smoke, thick and clinging. From where she sat, she could see them walk to the patrol car's front doors. The older one reached for the radio on his shoulder and began transmitting with the same calm cadence he might use to report a stray animal. "Unit 62, we're 1015, one female, possession of narcotics, resisting search." The report was false in every line. Her name hadn't been logged. The drug hadn't been tested. There had been no resistance. But it was on record now, and that was all it took to turn fiction into evidence in systems that rarely questioned the script, especially when the person in the back seat looked like her. The drive to the station was quiet, punctuated only by the occasional burst of static from the police radio and the idle hum of tires cutting through the last stretch of rain-soaked asphalt. Alana remained still. She didn't ask where they were taking her. She didn't plead for reconsideration. Her silence wasn't submission. It was precision. Every second, she was watching. Every detail, from the faded registration sticker on the dashboard to the burn mark on the younger officer's sleeve, was being recorded in her mind like testimony. By the time they pulled into the station's rear entrance, she already had their names memorized, the numbers on the cruiser, the route they had taken, the exact moment they had escalated without cause. Every decision they made was logged behind her eyes, like evidence sealed in an airtight vault. She didn't know yet if justice would come, but if it ever did, she would meet it fully prepared. The older officer opened her door and guided her out again, his grip on her arm no longer mocking, just silent. They passed through a side entrance and entered a dim hallway with flickering lights and scuffed tile floors, the kind of station that hadn't seen real scrutiny in years. The air smelled of stale coffee and floor cleaner, and a single fan rattled against a barred window behind the booking desk. The desk sergeant looked up as they approached, then reached for a clipboard without much interest. "Possession and obstruction," the older officer said as he handed over the cuffs. The sergeant gave her a cursory glance, then reached for her ID. "Name?" "Alana Brooks." The desk sergeant typed with one hand, eyes still on her as if trying to match the tone of her voice with the person standing in front of him. His fingers tapped out the letters slowly, each keystroke a little too casual, like he didn't expect anything more than another name in a long line of early morning bookings. He glanced at the screen, his face neutral. Then he blinked. His posture shifted just slightly, but Alana caught it. The subtle narrowing of his eyes, the almost imperceptible tilt of his head, the way his jaw paused in mid-clench, as though a word had gotten stuck behind his teeth. He typed again, this time faster. Another line. Another search. He leaned in, as if his proximity to the monitor might clarify what he was reading. The screen in front of him flickered, then loaded something with a different border, a different clearance level, and for a second, his face drained of its passive disinterest. Hold on," he muttered. Not to her, not to the officers, but to himself. He stepped back, just slightly, and looked at her again. Really looked this time. His eyes scanned her face, her clothes, the quiet control in her posture, the way she hadn't once asked for leniency, hadn't begged or barked or cried out when they shoved her through the door. She wasn't acting like a cornered citizen. She was observing, recording, waiting. "You said Brooks?" he asked, his voice lower now, tone losing its casual authority. "Yes," she replied simply. He looked back at the monitor. His hand hovered over the keyboard, then moved toward the phone beside the terminal. "What's the issue?" the older officer asked, the irritation creeping back into his voice now that silence was stretching too long. But the sergeant didn't answer. He picked up the phone and dialed an internal line, murmuring something into the receiver too low to hear. His eyes remained locked on the screen. Alana, still in cuffs, stood in complete stillness. She didn't shift, didn't speak. She simply watched the weight shift from confusion to dread as the man on the phone glanced back at her, now pale and tight-jawed. He hung up, turned to the older officer, and gestured toward the hallway without explanation. "Both of you step into the conference room. Now." The officers exchanged a glance. The younger one, Trent, had just entered behind them, clearly expecting a smooth handoff and maybe even a pat on the back. Instead, the urgency in the sergeant's voice seemed to knock him off balance. "What's going on?" Trent asked. "Do it," the sergeant said again, this time sharper. They hesitated, but finally moved down the hall. Alana tracked the way they walked, tense, eyes darting back toward her as if the room had suddenly shifted its center of gravity. The door closed behind them. The sergeant walked back to the desk and reached for her cuffs, unlocking them with quick, shaking hands. "Ma'am, I'm going to need your phone." Alana handed it over, without hesitation. "We're logging it as personal property," he said. "It'll be returned." "I'd like to make a call." He nodded but said nothing. His fingers moved again on the keyboard, logging the confiscation, entering her name again into the federal database. Then the system pinged. A sharp alert flashed red across the screen with an automated audio cue, a chime not usually triggered in local processing systems. On the screen, her photo now appeared, Not the DMV headshot, not a scanned license image, but an official federal portrait. The banner beneath it read, Brooks, Alana, Director, Drug Enforcement Administration, Classified Access Level 5, Immediate Federal Contact Required. The sergeant's mouth parted slightly. He looked up at her again, 1,000 quiet thoughts crashing together behind his eyes. "Ma'am," he said slowly, we didn't know. I need to get someone on the line right now." "You'll do more than that," she said, her voice low but razor-sharp. "Secure the premises. Freeze internal access. I want surveillance logs sealed and untouched, every access card locked down, and your chain of custody desk secured. This building is now under federal hold. I'm initiating an internal investigation under DEA authority, and I'll need a secure line within 60 seconds. "Yes, Director," the sergeant said, the word catching awkwardly in his throat as he reached for the phone again. Alana didn't wait for permission. She walked to the nearest secure terminal, the one she knew would be connected to federal systems through encrypted channels, and began entering her override codes from memory. The room behind her had gone silent. Moments later, Agent Derek Salgado's voice came through the line. "Director Brooks?" "Yes, I've been detained under false pretenses by 2 officers in the Pine Bluff County Precinct. I'm initiating immediate lockdown and requesting an emergency team for physical security, data extraction, and chain of evidence review." There was a pause. "Are you safe?" "I'm uninjured. The officers have disappeared." "They're no longer in the building." "Say again?" "They ran the moment my identity was confirmed. They were already gone before the system pinged. This was not an accident. The drugs they planted were packaged in evidence-grade seals. I believe they pulled them from a federal seizure. I need everything locked down, now." "Understood. Extraction team inbound. 40 minutes. Hold position." She ended the call, turned toward the sergeant, and gave a single instruction. "Get every exit monitored. Check every cruiser logged in for the past 3 hours. I want the last 15 minutes of internal video pulled and backed up to external drive. Unmodified." The sergeant nodded, then paused. "Their cruiser. It's not out front." She didn't blink. "Find out where it was parked. Search all lots. They're gone, but they didn't walk. That vehicle either switched plates or was ditched. Put out an alert under DEA jurisdiction and issue an internal missing vehicle flag." He picked up the radio, his voice now shaky but moving with urgency. Somewhere in the building, a siren chirped, a short, sharp sound meant for emergencies only. Across the county, an alert would now mark the precinct as under federal restriction. Officers from other stations would soon descend, not in defense, but with questions, the kind that rippled through systems, pulled files from locked drawers, and cracked open cases that departments thought long buried. Alana stood at the edge of the desk, her hands no longer cuffed, her name no longer dismissed, her authority no longer in doubt. They had no idea who she was when they stopped her, but they knew now. And whoever helped those men vanish, whoever signed off on those drugs, whoever had been running the playbook behind closed doors, would learn the same lesson the hard way. She wasn't just here to clear her name. She was here to tear theirs apart. The evidence room was colder than expected, both in temperature and atmosphere. The storage technician, a tired man in his 60s with half-moon glasses and a faded polo bearing the precinct's insignia, stood awkwardly near the steel rack where the cocaine sample had just been logged and sealed. His hands trembled slightly as he passed the clipboard to Agent Derek Salgado, who had arrived with the first wave of the federal team 23 minutes after Alana's call. The signature on the chain of custody form was still drying in ink, and it told a story that didn't match the arrest report. Salgado's face remained still as he read the entry. Then he passed it to Alana. The tag number on the bag didn't correspond to anything in the local precinct's booking system. There had been no report filed, no inventory code assigned by their evidence clerk. Instead, it bore a federal trace code, one linked to Operation Lancer, a DEA-led multi-agency sting that had seized over 400 kilos of cartel-grade product 2 months ago in Miami. That shipment had been airlifted to a secure DEA lockup in Virginia and had remained under strict surveillance, or so they thought. Alana studied the form. The code was real. The drug test packet stapled to the plastic pouch was authentic. But the fact that it had ended up in the trunk of her car, on a back road in Georgia, in the hands of 2 county officers with no clearance or authorization, meant one thing. Someone had breached federal inventory and slipped it back onto the street. Not as contraband, as bait. Her expression didn't change as she looked up from the clipboard. Her voice didn't rise, but when she spoke, the room quieted around her. This was never in their custody. It never should have left our facility. Someone bypassed 2 levels of internal clearance and replaced the logging codes to hide the extraction. Whoever moved this didn't do it alone. Salgado nodded. They had access. They had time. And they knew it wouldn't be questioned, because they didn't expect anyone important to be pulled over with it. She handed the clipboard back to the technician. This whole facility is now part of a federal crime scene. Secure every room, lock every evidence cabinet, and I want a manifest of everything logged in the past 30 days. If one piece is missing, I want to know when and by who. The technician swallowed hard, nodded, and stepped back, making a quiet call to the rest of his team. Meanwhile, outside the storage area, tension had begun to spread across the precinct like oil beneath a closed door. Officers who had mocked her arrest now stood stiff at their desks, watching the hallway with side glances, speaking less, and staying closer to their phones. There was no formal announcement, no alarm sounding over the intercom, but the truth had already arrived, and it was written in every cleared throat and avoided eye. Internal Affairs showed up less than an hour later. The woman leading them, Captain Naomi Kersey, stepped through the precinct doors in a tailored gray suit, flanked by 2 analysts and an assistant from the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. She was known for saying very little, but understanding very much, and she wasted no time being polite. Her team began seizing digital logs, questioning officers, and isolating desk terminals. The local police chief, a man named Walter Creel with a long face and thinning hair combed over to preserve a sense of command, tried to assert authority in the early minutes. He approached Alana near the operations board and greeted her with an expression meant to convey concern, but his eyes darted nervously, as if searching for a version of the truth that would keep him untouched. "Director Brooks," he said, offering a hand she didn't take. "I just want to say this is all a big misunderstanding. Maddox and Calloway have always been solid officers. We run a tight ship down here." Alana looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You're telling me you had no idea 2 of your officers accessed cartel-level product from a federal evidence locker, used it to fabricate an arrest, and then fled the building before you could even learn my name?" Creel hesitated, his mouth opening without a sound. "They never gave me a reason to doubt them," he said finally. "They've been with the department for years. Commendations, high-clearance patrol units, good arrest records." "Too good," Salgado added, stepping in beside her. "Their stops follow a pattern. Mostly Black and Latino drivers. Small counties. No body cam footage. In every case where a complaint was filed, no footage was available, and no one followed up." Creel rubbed the back of his neck, now clearly sweating. "I'm not saying there weren't lapses, but you have to understand how short-staffed we've been. Sometimes protocols slip." Alana stepped forward, not with aggression, but with absolute clarity. "What's slipping here isn't protocol, Chief. It's trust. And if you didn't know what they were doing, then either they were smarter than you, or you were too comfortable to notice. I need to know which. Before he could respond, Salgado's phone vibrated. He stepped away, answered with a sharp "Salgado," and went silent as he listened. Alana waited. 30 seconds later, he returned, holding the phone just far enough for her to see the image on the screen. It was a grainy photo from a surveillance camera, angled from the corner of a convenience store just outside the county line. It showed Maddox and Calloway stepping out of their cruiser and into the back seat of a black SUV. The plates had already been run. The vehicle was registered to Marcus Velt. Alana's brow furrowed. "That name sound familiar?" Salgado asked. "It should," she said, her voice dropping just slightly. Marcus Velt was a narcotics officer stationed in Arizona. He died in a car fire 5 years ago. "Apparently not," Salgado replied, eyes still on the screen. "Because he's the one who picked them up." Alana took the phone, studied the timestamp, and then turned toward Naomi, who had just finished sealing the first round of personnel logs. "I want everything you can find on Velt. If he faked his death, he didn't do it alone. And if he's back, then this isn't a two-man operation. It's a network." Naomi's face, usually unreadable, grew colder. "Understood." Salgado folded his arms, his voice low and certain. "This isn't random. They knew where that product came from. They knew how to make it disappear. And now we know they're being protected by someone with the resources to erase federal records and revive dead men." Alana nodded once. "Then we don't just hunt the men. We follow the silence." The following morning began in the secured conference room of the Pine Bluff County Precinct, where the overhead lights buzzed faintly above a table now covered in printed arrest records, case files, and digital logs. The wall-mounted screen displayed a map of the Tri-County region, with red pins marking every stop made by Officers Maddox and Calloway over the past 14 months. There were more than 50. Of those, at least 32 resulted in charges. Most of the names were Black or Latino. Most of the charges were either possession, intent to distribute, or resisting arrest. Nearly all of them lacked body cam footage. Alana stood with her arms crossed as Agent Julia Kane, the tech specialist brought in by Salgado's team, scrolled through the digital overlays with a remote. Each pin pulsed faintly on the screen, the data streaming beside it in compressed reports, locations, timestamps, suspect names, outcomes. The patterns weren't just suggestive. They were deliberate. "They knew where to hunt," Julia said, her voice quiet but clipped with precision. Most of the stops were just outside urban zones, where dash cams were less likely to be present, and the officers could claim erratic driving without much evidence. They filed nearly identical language across multiple reports. No follow-up interviews, no internal reviews. Alana walked to the screen and tapped the top left quadrant, where one pin blinked differently than the others. "What's this one?" Julia clicked. A case file opened. Jordan Lamar, age 22. Stopped for failure to signal. Found dead 2 hours after booking. Ruled suicide. Alana's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Bring me everything," she said. "Full arrest report, intake forms, photos, video logs, whatever exists." 10 minutes later, the file spread across the table. A few pieces were immediately clear. Jordan Lamar had no prior record. He had called his mother from the holding cell an hour after arriving, sounding scared but coherent. According to the log, he was discovered hanging by a torn bedsheet 90 minutes later. The report claimed he had shown signs of depression, that he had been combative during arrest, and that he was uncooperative and unstable. There were no photos of the cell, no interviews with other inmates, no recorded body cam footage of the arrest itself. What existed was minimal, just enough to close a case without raising questions. Salgado scanned the thin report and frowned. No suicide watch order. No psych evaluation. No intake documentation signed by a supervisor. Naomi, standing near the edge of the room, said what none of them wanted to, but all of them were thinking. They killed him. Alana picked up the booking form and turned it over. Where's the officer's signature? Julia leaned over. It was electronically signed. By Maddox. Alana was silent for a moment. Then she gestured to her assistant, who had been compiling a list of all known arrestees from the past 18 months. Pull every death in custody linked to this precinct. I want to know if any other names appear without corresponding footage. Cross-reference with phone logs. Check for calls made from holding cells to families that were never documented. Julia hesitated, then added, "There's something else." She walked to her laptop, brought up a folder marked Lamar Bystander Video, and turned the screen so Alana could see. The video was shaky, captured from a distance by someone in a parked car across the street from where the arrest occurred. It had been uploaded to a local community Facebook page, but never submitted as evidence. The police had never referenced it. No one had followed up, but the footage was clear. It showed Jordan Lamar being pulled from his vehicle. Maddox was clearly visible, his hand gripping Jordan by the collar, shouting words the mic couldn't catch. But the posture said enough. Jordan didn't fight. His hands were up. But the shove into the side of the cruiser was forceful enough to make a bystander flinch. Calloway appeared a moment later, opened the rear door, and helped push Jordan inside with a knee pressed against his thigh. There was no urgency, no concern, just rhythm, like they'd done it 100 times. Alana's hand hovered over the screen as she replayed it. How was this missed? Julia shook her head. It wasn't missed. It was buried. The account that posted it was flagged for unrelated content and deleted 3 weeks after the video went live. No one archived it officially. If it wasn't for a community rights group scraping it during an annual sweep, we'd have lost it for good. Naomi leaned forward. The medical examiner's report said Jordan had ligature marks, but no injuries consistent with restraint. That's already a contradiction. They didn't expect anyone to compare notes, Salgado said. They knew how to write it just clean enough to slide past oversight. Alana stood slowly, pressing her hands against the table as her eyes swept across the files, maps, names, and silent patterns staring back at her. This isn't misconduct. This is structured abuse of power. They didn't just target people. They hunted them. This was designed. Julia opened another file. There's a cluster of cases, same signatures, same language, where evidence was collected but never submitted. We cross-checked the arrest reports with the official inventory. Some of the drugs were logged, others weren't. One case mentions a kilo of unmarked powder found during a routine stop, but there's no trace of that kilo anywhere in the property room. Alana glanced at Salgado, who was already moving toward the door. If that product disappeared, it was either resold or used in another plant. We need to know where that kilo ended up. That means every piece of inventory logged by Maddox or Calloway in the last year needs to be double verified. Right now. Salgado nodded without a word. Alana turned to Naomi. We reopen Jordan Lamar's case, file a motion with DOJ oversight and the Federal Civil Rights Division, exhume the body if necessary, and issue subpoenas to the officers who signed off on the original suicide claim. Naomi didn't flinch. I'll file the orders myself. They moved with urgency, but not panic. What they were building now wasn't a case, it was a structure, a frame that could hold the weight of something much larger. It wasn't just about Maddox or Calloway anymore. It was about a system that had protected them, erased for them, signed for them, and stayed quiet while lives were destroyed and evidence was passed hand to hand like currency. Alana closed the last file on the table and straightened. From now on, we treat every one of their arrests as a federal investigation. She paused, her voice low but certain. This wasn't about rogue cops. This was an operation. 2 days after the Lamar case was reopened, the call came through on a secure DOJ line routed directly to Naomi Kersey's encrypted inbox. The message was unsigned, the metadata scrambled through 3 proxy servers, but the tone of the short audio clip left no doubt that the speaker was on edge. They've been in 5 departments in 10 years. Every time they transfer, a major seizure gets compromised. Either it disappears, gets mislogged, or ends up on the street again. If you're serious about taking this apart, check Pine Ridge, Jefferson Parish, Marlow County, and Lorton Heights. Same pattern, same cleanup crews, same missing product. I'm not giving you my name. If they find out I talked, I'm next. The clip cut off mid-breath. No further details offered. Naomi replayed the message twice, her fingers already flying across the keyboard as she opened secure DOJ access to the National Precinct transfer logs. Within 30 minutes, she had verified the movement history of both Maddox and Calloway. The whistleblower was right. The 2 men had moved through 5 different jurisdictions since 2013. In every case, their arrival had been within 3 months of a major cartel-linked seizure. And in every case, either the evidence had been mysteriously compromised or quietly reclassified and removed from federal access logs. She compiled the transfer dates, correlated them with federal drug task force operations in those regions, and began assembling a timeline that was as damning as it was meticulous. In Marlow County, a 2016 bust had netted nearly $2 million in unmarked bills and 73 pounds of uncut heroin. 3 weeks later, the cash was rerouted to a DEA field office and marked as lost in transit. No suspects were ever charged. Calloway's name was buried in the arresting officer's list, misspelled and abbreviated. In Pine Ridge, the 2019 seizure of cartel-linked fentanyl was reduced from its original log of 6 bricks to just 2 by the time it reached evidence lockup. No formal review was ever conducted. Maddox had been stationed there for less than a month, assigned to the Narcotics Task Force on a temporary federal fusion team, whose roster had since been scrubbed from official records. Naomi forwarded the full report to Alana's direct line, along with a note. It wasn't just a pattern, it was a playbook. By the time the sun set over the outer edges of the county, Alana stood in front of the digital caseboard, now dominating the conference room wall. Each department listed by year, each officer's assignment marked by time-stamped transfers and redacted references to ghost task forces. The connections were no longer abstract. They were logistical, intentional, and far from isolated. Agent Julia Kane, the cyber intelligence analyst, joined her at the display. "I ran the property room audits you requested," she said, voice low and tight with urgency. "And you were right to suspect manipulation. Dozens of seizure records were edited post-logging. Many of them used the same digital fingerprint, a backdoor access key logged under a Level 3 DEA override code." Alana turned to her. "Those codes are issued through encrypted channels to senior agents only. Who had access?" "That's the problem," Julia replied. "The ID that accessed the system was assigned to a DEA staffer who died 6 years ago. His profile was retired after his passing. But someone revived the credentials last year through an administrative reset protocol." Alana narrowed her eyes. "And no one flagged that?" "No," Julia said, stepping to her tablet and expanding the system diagram. "Because the credentials were funneled through an internal auditing tool, one that was supposed to be used for emergency corrections or to update sealed data for legal transfer. That system is known as Zeno." The room went still. Naomi looked up from her notes. "I've heard that name before. Old infrastructure. Pre-cloud." Julia nodded. "It was built over a decade ago, intended to track and cross-reference federal task force inventory from multiple departments. It was never meant to be permanent. But the system was never decommissioned. Instead, it was buried under a series of nested protocols and used as a clearinghouse for evidence log overrides. No one even knows who currently maintains the internal scripts. It operates autonomously, unless manually interrupted. And someone's been using it, Alana said, already connecting the implications in her mind. To rewrite logs, reassign inventory, make evidence disappear, and if the system has root-level access to both DOJ and DEA terminals, then they're not just moving product, Julia finished. They're moving it with federal authorization, digital paper trails, approved under ghost accounts. And if we hadn't tripped the system by entering your ID during booking, it would have stayed hidden. Alana's jaw tightened. They used my arrest to test it, she said. They were seeing how long the system would delay alerting higher command. That's why the ping took 90 seconds instead of 10. They were watching. Naomi stepped closer. And that means someone on the inside is still active. Someone who doesn't just know the system. Someone who built it. Salgado entered the room then, a fresh stack of records in hand. I pulled your old Lorton Heights task force files, he said, placing them on the table. There's something you need to see. He opened one of the folders and pointed to a case summary involving a 2015 cocaine seizure logged under a now-defunct task force named Operation Holdback, a joint venture between the DEA, local enforcement, and Border Patrol, tasked with tracking cartel routes into secondary cities. The case file listed Maddox and Calloway as tactical advisors brought in to assist with rural surveillance zones. What the file didn't mention, but Salgado had confirmed through external logs, was that Operation Holdback had quietly disbanded a year later, after internal corruption charges surfaced and several high-ranking supervisors took early retirement. But Maddox and Calloway had never been named in the fallout. They had simply transferred. Again. Alana looked at the name on the final page, Agent Marcus Velt, listed as a systems liaison during the Lorton operation. The same man currently confirmed alive, presumed dead, and now the ghost driver who had picked up her arresting officers 2 days prior. They created this network, she said, through a program we buried, through a system we forgot, and they're still using it, because it was never designed to be shut down, only rerouted. Naomi exhaled slowly, her composure steady even as the scope widened. Then we have to do what no one else has. We bring this out of the dark. Alana didn't nod. She simply stared at the board, then back to the single word blinking at the top of the access log, Zeno. The man who agreed to speak came quietly. He arrived at the federal satellite office under a false name, passed through 2 checkpoints, and requested to meet only with Naomi and Alana present. No recordings, no transcripts, and no digital trace. He looked older than his 59 years, worn from years of choices that had clearly cost him more than his badge. His name was William Frey, a retired sergeant who had once served on a federal task force out of El Paso during the height of the Southern Cartel surge. His career ended abruptly in 2015, buried under a medical discharge and a non-disclosure agreement that, by design, left his entire personnel file classified. He took a seat across from them in the empty conference room, a man stripped of the certainty that once followed his voice. When he spoke, it wasn't the rehearsed denial or tight-lipped professionalism they had come to expect from uncooperative sources. It was something closer to grief. "You're looking for the wrong thing," he said, his voice rough from years of disuse and maybe guilt. "You think you're chasing a bad precinct or a dirty unit, but what you're actually looking at is a leftover, a remnant, what's left of a program we never fully shut down, just buried." The name changed, the badge numbers changed, but the purpose never did. Naomi folded her arms as she leaned slightly forward. "What program?" He looked between them, then placed a single folder on the table. Inside were field reports, stripped of insignias, most of them yellowed from time and bearing handwritten notes in the margins. Operation Spire, he said, later rebranded as Holdback. It started as a joint task force, funded through a black budget. DEA, Customs, local fusion teams. We weren't the ones making the arrests. We were the ones cleaning them up. When raids got messy, when evidence didn't line up, when seizures were too big for the paperwork to survive scrutiny, we stepped in and corrected the narrative. Sometimes that meant rerouting product to false inventories. Sometimes it meant redirecting suspects to private transport. And sometimes it meant the footage went missing. Alana didn't blink. You were evidence control. Frey gave a small, humorless laugh. We were reputation control. We existed to preserve the appearance of success. When a raid failed or exposed an internal leak, we doctored it. We made sure the chain stayed clean, even if we had to burn every link along the way. Naomi leaned forward slightly. How did that evolve into product being sold back onto the street? Frey's smile disappeared. Some of us started getting offers, not direct, never obvious. But if a crate of heroin went missing, and nobody asked, then someone down the line was benefiting. Eventually, that line got blurred. What started as covering up mistakes turned into covering up theft, and then theft became the point. Alana kept her eyes on him, calm but sharp. And Maddox? Calloway? They were late additions, he said, recruited under the last wave before Spire got shut down. After Holdback disbanded, they didn't leave. They went underground, created their own structure. They used what they learned, how to scrub evidence, how to exploit audit systems, how to move product inside the badge. She exchanged a glance with Naomi before asking the next question. Were they acting alone? Frey shook his head. No one ever acts alone in this. You need clearance, access, and above all, someone to wipe the system when a mistake happens. That's where Zeno came in. The name dropped like a weight in the room. Naomi's tone sharpened. Is it a person or a system? Frey exhaled. That's the thing. It was both. Originally, Zeno was an internal task signature, a clearance layer embedded into the back end of our evidence chain, used when product had to be held back for intelligence operations. But over time, someone turned that signature into a ghost identity. They wrote scripts that could override logs, rewrite timestamps, and issue orders under the alias. No one questioned it, because it looked like federal clearance. Zeno became a myth, something we whispered about, joked about. If something disappeared, we'd say, Zeno took it. At first, it was sarcasm, but later, it was real. Alana leaned forward. So someone used a placeholder system meant for classified intelligence and turned it into a mask for laundering product. Exactly, he said. And they got good at it. Too good. I think at some point, even the cartels realized it was safer to let those units handle distribution. Less blood, less noise, and the shipments moved faster. Who controlled it? Naomi asked. Frey looked down for a long moment. No one, he said eventually. Or everyone. That's the problem. It was never a single person. Once the system was open, it became a door. And anyone with the right key could step through. Alana stood slowly, pacing once before turning back to the table. You're giving us access to these files. I'm giving you a chance to stop what we should have ended a long time ago, Frey said. But you need to understand something. This isn't just a ghost network. It's a machine, and it runs on silence. Everyone who's gotten too close has either vanished or been labeled unstable. The last agent who filed a formal complaint against a fake Zeno signature ended up institutionalized within 2 months. There was no appeal, no hearing, just gone. Naomi said nothing, but Alana could see the storm building behind her eyes. Frey stood and reached for his coat. "I'll disappear after this. And I don't want protection. I've lived too long with the weight of it already. But if you want to stop them, you can't just arrest the men. You have to kill the system." He left the room quietly, closing the door behind him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Naomi turned to Alana. "You believe him?" "I believe the pieces fit," Alana said. "And that's enough." Salgado appeared at the doorway with fresh intel. "We just traced an outgoing communication to one of the known burner numbers linked to Maddox. It pinged out of Louisiana, bounced through a border network, and landed in Mexico. But there's chatter he's back. Word is they're trying to set up a new route." She turned toward the others, her tone even but resolute. "Then we find them before the next drop. No more chasing shadows, no more reacting after they move. We get ahead of it. We treat every piece of mislogged evidence and every ghosted shipment as an active threat. We start hunting them with their own playbook." Naomi gave a nod of quiet agreement. Salgado's jaw flexed slightly. "There's something else," he added. "I reached out to an old analyst who was forced out a few years ago. Someone who flagged Zeno long before anyone would even admit it existed. She didn't file whistleblower status. Said she didn't trust the process. She's been quiet since. But she's agreed to meet. With you. Off record. She won't talk to anyone else." Alana studied him for a moment, then gave a subtle nod. "Set it up. I want the meeting within the hour. Quiet location. No surveillance." "She chose the spot herself," Salgado said. "You're going to want to hear what she has to say." The cafe was barely marked. Nothing more than a faded awning and a doorbell with no sign, no hours, and no promise that anyone would open it. Inside, it smelled faintly of roasted beans and dusted cinnamon, and the single overhead fan spun slowly, as though even the air was trying not to draw attention to itself. Alana sat alone in the back booth, facing the door, her posture relaxed, but her senses sharpened beneath the stillness. Her coat lay beside her, folded but accessible. Her eyes tracked every movement in the room without appearing to. She didn't carry a gun. She didn't need one. Not here. The woman who entered wore a gray wool jacket and a black backpack slung over one shoulder. She didn't hesitate, didn't scan the room. She walked straight to Alana's table and sat down without ceremony. She pulled out a USB drive from her pocket and placed it between them, pressing it gently against the table with one fingertip. "Corinne Dax," she said, voice low, eyes unwavering. "Former systems analyst, DEA Cyber Division. Terminated 3 years ago. Official reason, improper handling of classified data. Real reason? I flagged something that scared people with corner offices." Alana nodded once. "Zeno." Corinne gave a tired smile. "You figured out the name. That's more than most. But you haven't figured out what it actually is. I've heard it called a ghost ID, a script layer, a digital myth used to clean up dirty records." Corinne shook her head. "It's more than that. Zeno is not a person or a file. It's an ecosystem, a backdoor surveillance lattice that was originally created for cross-agency integration after 9/11. It was designed to quietly intercept, duplicate, and archive data across DEA, Customs, and a few select intelligence branches. It had full clearance because it wasn't supposed to act, only observe." Alana didn't interrupt. She listened. Corinne continued, her tone tightening. "But somewhere along the way, someone embedded execution commands. They created access tunnels that could override logs, reassign identities, and even retroactively inject inventory movements. If a kilo was seized in Texas, Zeno could erase the entry and reassign it to an unrelated bust in Phoenix, and no one would be the wiser. It didn't change reality. It changed the paperwork. And in law enforcement, paperwork is reality. Alana leaned forward. Why wasn't this flagged sooner? I flagged it, Corinne said flatly. That's why I got fired. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim black folder, unmarked, laminated, and sealed with a string. She opened it slowly and turned it toward Alana. Inside were 3 printed pages. One of them bore a familiar signature, Alana's own. I don't expect you to remember every document you signed during onboarding, Corinne said, her voice softer now. Most new directors don't. But tucked inside the electronic approval batch was a system renewal directive, a digital persistence order, greenlighting several legacy systems for quiet reactivation. Zeno was one of them. Alana stared at the signature. Her own initials, her own authorization. The date matched her first official week in office. Corinne didn't gloat. She didn't look angry. She just looked tired. They've been using your clearance for nearly a year. Every fake arrest they've hidden, every seizure they've rerouted, every witness who's gone missing, they've done it behind your name. Alana felt no rush of shame, no anger, only clarity. They baited me, she said quietly. They planted the drugs, waited to see if the system would trigger an alert. They were testing how long it would take for the back door to catch. When it didn't, they knew Zeno was still alive. And when it finally pinged, Corinne added, they knew they had to disappear, because someone was watching again. Alana closed the folder carefully, her fingers resting against the edge of the page bearing her signature. I'm not here to protect a title, she said. I'm here to shut this down. Corinne gave her a long look. Then you'll need to burn the root, not just the branches. This thing isn't hidden anymore. It's institutional, which means it's protected. Alana stood, sliding the folder and USB into her bag. Then let's make it unprotected. She left the cafe with a calm expression, but the weight of what she now carried pressed down with a new kind of gravity. There was no longer any room for doubt. Zeno wasn't a flaw in the system. It was an organ, pulsing beneath everything they thought was secure, shielded by bureaucracy and immune to daylight. And now, it was moving, reacting. That night, after a long debrief with Salgado and Naomi, Alana returned to her vehicle parked in the underground garage below the federal building. Her clearance card opened the gate without delay, and the lot was nearly empty. Just the echo of her heels and the hum of overhead lights buzzing faintly against concrete. She moved with practiced ease toward her sedan, key in hand, her eyes sweeping the area. It was subtle, so subtle that most wouldn't have noticed. But her instincts were sharper than most. A faint shift in the alignment of her wipers, a slight lift in the hood that hadn't been there that morning. She froze a few steps away, then slowly circled the vehicle, scanning the undercarriage reflection in the polished floor beneath. That's when she saw it. An unfamiliar cord snaking from beneath the wheel well, almost invisible, tucked deep behind the inner panel. She stepped back immediately. Security swept the vehicle within 10 minutes. The device they recovered wasn't explosive, but it was invasive. A tampered GPS relay hardwired into her ignition module. With it, someone could track her movements in real time, manipulate the engine remotely, or stall her vehicle in transit. The tech team labeled it surveillance-enhanced sabotage, the kind that didn't just gather information, but waited for the right moment to strike. But that wasn't the part that froze the blood in her veins. The part that mattered was the note, taped behind the passenger sun visor in clean block lettering, printed on plain white paper. Go home, Director, or someone else won't. Alana's jaw tightened, but her expression didn't break. She folded the note once and slid it into her jacket pocket. She didn't need to ask who someone else referred to. An hour later, her niece's house was under full federal protection. A tactical team had been placed on rotation, plainclothes agents embedded in the neighborhood, and all communication devices rerouted through encrypted systems. Alana didn't call, didn't warn, didn't show fear. She trusted her team to do what was necessary. And then she went back to work. By morning, the task force had shifted from investigation to pursuit. With Corinne's decrypted files and Naomi's internal audits as foundation, Alana ordered a coordinated multi-state sting operation designed to disrupt the very veins Zeno had relied on to move silently through the system. The teams were deployed to 4 locations: Phoenix, Baton Rouge, Tampa, and Bakersfield. Each had been identified as a past nexus point for false inventory movements tied to ghost task forces or compromised seizures. Federal vehicles moved quietly. Air surveillance circled at altitude. No headlines, no press. Only precision. In Phoenix, a DEA storage facility that had reported a fire in 2018 was found to be quietly operational under a private logistics company registered to a shell corporation in Delaware. Inside, agents discovered 6 crates of narcotics bearing original DEA seals, cases previously marked as destroyed. The men who ran the facility were gone. No alarms had triggered. No resistance had been met. Only fresh tire tracks on the rear loading dock and a single office desk drawer left open, as if someone had left in a hurry. In Baton Rouge, federal agents moved on a trailer yard believed to be a transfer point. What they found was an empty lot, the trailers stripped of plates, the office trailer burned from the inside. But under the floorboards of the scorched unit, a heat-warped safe held dozens of untraceable federal case files, redacted, mismatched, torn from original context. Among them was the record of Jordan Lamar's arrest report, printed in duplicate, with 2 different timestamps. In Tampa, a safe house believed to be occupied by an inactive agent with old hold-back ties was found cleared out. Bedding still warm. Coffee grounds in the sink. But the server hidden behind a false wall hadn't been taken. Its contents revealed partial communication logs, encrypted message threads routed through Zeno aliases, including one labeled Velt. And in Bakersfield, a man matching Calloway's description had been spotted boarding a private crop duster at a decommissioned airstrip. By the time the team arrived, the plane was gone, its manifest blank. Each operation delivered more questions than answers. Each time they got close, someone vanished. Witnesses recanted. Phones disconnected. Surveillance cams conveniently lost power. Salgado stood beside Alana the evening after the 4th sting failed to land an arrest. They looked at the wall of photos and maps, lines crisscrossing jurisdictions, faces blurred or circled, every connection drawn in ink that still felt too thin. "We're chasing smoke," Salgado said. "No," Alana replied quietly. "We're chasing the wind behind the smoke. That's where the fire hides." She didn't speak of the note. She didn't speak of the GPS wire or her niece's sealed perimeter. What she did speak of was the next phase. Zeno survives because it never stays in one place long enough to be held accountable. That's going to change. We stop playing defense. We make noise. We make them react. Naomi stepped into the room, her face grave. "Then we'd better act fast." She handed Alana a slim red folder. Inside was a classified alert. One of their own, Special Agent Lucas Wren, a communications analyst, had gone dark. His last traceable signal was in Lorton Heights. His vehicle had been found torched on a logging road. No sign of struggle. No distress call. But inside the glove box, someone had left a copy of his ID card, cut in half, and a single slip of paper. This time, the message was different. One more echo, and the system dies with him. Alana didn't speak. She stared at the message until the words faded behind the fire building in her chest. She folded the note once, pressed it into her coat pocket, and looked at Salgado and Naomi. They're not just protecting Xeno anymore. They're weaponizing it. If they're willing to go after our analysts, they're building towards something bigger. Naomi's voice came out quiet, but certain. We need to hit them now. Not when they make their next move. Not when someone else disappears. We find the infrastructure. We collapse it. Alana nodded once. Then we don't wait for a name. We intercept the next shipment and bleed their route dry. At the kill zone, a natural bottleneck between jagged desert rock and a narrow underpass, the convoy rolled forward unaware. A rattlesnake hissed in the dust as the tires rumbled past. In the rear vehicle, one of the gunmen squinted through tinted glass, uneasy. "Something feels off," he muttered. The driver gave a quick glance. "You get nervous every time we hit West Texas." "No, man," the gunman said, tightening his grip on the compact SMG resting in his lap. "This ain't nerves. This is silence." 30 seconds later, their world exploded. The second-to-last sedan's front tires were shredded in an instant, the spike strip concealed in the sand bursting up as if summoned by the desert itself. The car skidded sideways, throwing a plume of dust as the engine screamed and died. Behind them, the last SUV tried to brake, but a blast of flashbangs rained from the ridge, disorienting the crew inside. "Go!" Alana's voice cut through the comms, sharp as a blade. "Teams move now! Breach and flank!" From both sides of the ridge, federal agents in tactical black surged down like thunder, ropes snapping, boots slamming into dirt. Muzzle flashes cut across the scene as gunmen from the lead truck leapt out and opened fire. Rounds tore through the haze, striking nothing as the agents kept moving in tight formation, using the shadows and staggered cover to close the distance. Alana didn't wait behind the line. She moved with the breach team, fast and low, her rifle up, her breaths short and even. The first gunman came around the side of the cargo truck, weapon raised, eyes wide. Alana dropped him with a single controlled burst to the vest. As he staggered backward, she was already on him, slamming her elbow into his throat, wrenching the weapon from his grip, and driving a knee into his sternum. He hit the ground hard. He wouldn't be getting up. "Two moving right," Naomi shouted over comms. "On it," Salgado replied. The rear SUV's door burst open, and two more men spilled out, one swinging a sawed-off, the other holding a short baton. The one with the baton lunged toward Alana. She sidestepped, grabbed his arm mid-swing, twisted, and used his momentum to drive him into the edge of the cargo truck with a sickening thud. He slumped, breath gone. The second man brought up the shotgun. Alana ducked, dropped to one knee, and drove her shoulder into his legs. He went down, firing wide, and before he could recover, she slammed the butt of her rifle into the side of his head, snapping it backward into the dirt. Salgado took position near the third truck, barking into comms. "Left side clear! Moving to intercept drivers! Watch for runners!" On cue, one of the drivers bolted from the cab. A pistol clutched in his shaking hands. Alana chased him down in the open. Not firing. Not yet. She caught him near the drop in the sand and tackled him hard, sending both of them rolling. Dust filled her throat. His fist clipped her cheek. She tasted blood. He tried to scramble up, wheezing, throwing wild punches. Alana blocked one, then two, then drove her palm straight into his nose with a sickening crack. He screamed, hands flying to his face. She kneed him in the stomach and pinned him down with her forearm. "You're done," she growled, spitting grit from her mouth as she zip-tied his wrists behind his back. Suddenly, calm crackle. "Director," Naomi's voice cut in, sharp and urgent. "We've got visual confirmation. Maddox and Calloway. East Ridge, behind the wrecked SUV. They're moving fast, flanking toward the dry gulch." Alana's eyes narrowed. "They're trying to disappear again." She grabbed her rifle, rose to her feet, and took off at full sprint across the uneven sand. Salgado followed 2 steps behind, flanking left, both weaving between boulders as gunfire cracked behind them. Cover fire from the last active gunman near the second cargo truck. "They're trying to draw us off," Salgado shouted. Alana didn't break stride. Let them try. The gulch dipped sharply behind the wrecked SUV, a dry cut in the earth where floodwater used to run. Maddox and Calloway moved like wolves, fast and practiced, sidearms drawn. They reached the ridge and turned, surprised to see Alana charging straight at them. "You should have stayed behind your desk," Maddox snarled, raising his pistol. Before he could pull the trigger, Alana fired. His arm jerked as the bullet grazed his shoulder. Clean shot, just enough to knock the weapon loose. Calloway roared and lunged. Alana met him head-on, tackling him into the wall of the gulch with bone-jarring force. His fist came down hard, slamming into her ribs. She grunted, twisted, and rammed her elbow into his throat. He choked, but kept swinging, catching her jaw with a savage uppercut that rocked her back. Salgado engaged Maddox, charging low, driving him into the sand with a violent thud. The 2 men rolled, fists flying. Maddox was strong, feral, but Salgado was trained and furious. He slammed his knee into Maddox's thigh, elbowed his temple, and forced him onto his back, jamming his forearm against the man's throat. "Try planting something now, you sick coward." Maddox spat blood in his face. "You're too late." Alana, locked in a brutal exchange with Calloway, ducked another wild hook and drove her boot into his shin. As he faltered, she surged forward and delivered a headbutt that cracked across his nose. He screamed, blood pouring. She seized the moment and flipped him over, twisting his arm behind his back and slamming his face into the dirt with a heavy exhale. "I should have put you down the first time," Calloway growled, gasping. Alana tightened the restraint. "You're going to rot instead." Salgado cuffed Maddox with zip ties, dragging him upright. "You just lost your shadow. You're exposed, and we've got everything." Maddox laughed, even with blood in his teeth. "You don't even know what you're standing on." "We will," Alana said, rising to her feet, gun still steady, breathing hard. "We'll turn over every stone, every precinct, every name, and we'll make sure your network burns." Calloway thrashed in his restraints. "You think this ends with us? You have no idea how deep this goes." "You're not the story anymore," Alana said. "You're evidence." She motioned to the agents descending the gulch. "Get them both in transport. Secure isolation. No contact. No noise. I want them in black sight holding within the hour." As the agents moved in, dragging the broken men toward the convoy, Salgado turned to her. "That was close," he said. "Too close," Alana muttered. Her knuckles throbbed, her ribs burned, but her eyes stayed sharp. "They didn't expect us to come at them head-on. They always ran. This time they stood their ground." Salgado frowned. "Which means they knew something we didn't." Alana nodded slowly. "We intercepted the play, but I don't think it was the final move." Her comms unit buzzed. Naomi's voice returned. "Director, we've decrypted the manifest in the lead truck. There's a secondary meeting point listed. Different from Lisbon. Domestic. Houston. Marked for 48 hours from now. And it's got Velt's signature on it." Alana's breath caught. "He's still in country." Naomi hesitated. "Or he wanted us to think he left. And now, he wants us to come." Alana looked across the desert, at the blinking lights of their victory. She didn't smile, because she knew. This wasn't the end. It was the invitation. The digital forensics lab inside the secured federal annex ran on red lighting and silent urgency. The air was cold, the hum of server racks steady and low. The USB retrieved from the mobile command crate had taken hours to bypass, Its encryption wasn't standard cartel, nor even rogue government. It was custom, built by someone who understood the deep spine of DEA architecture, someone who knew where to bury information so deep the agency itself wouldn't know it existed. Corinne stood at the console, eyes locked on the data feed crawling across the monitors. Her face was pale, drained not from shock but recognition. Naomi stood beside her, cross-referencing each file as it unlocked, while Salgado and Alana watched in silence. The files weren't just logs or chat threads. They were dossiers, detailed reports spanning more than a decade, each folder labeled by badge number and last known department. Inside, arrest records, inventory transfers, evidence audits, memos sent and intercepted, chain of custody documents doctored in near-identical formatting across 6 different precincts. Dozens of officers scattered across the country, most of them still active. Alana stepped forward, arms folded as she leaned over Corinne's shoulder. How many names? Corinne didn't look away from the screen. 73, so far. Naomi exhaled through her nose, slowly. These aren't just crooked cops. They're co-conspirators. Every one of them helped move, cover, or reclassify cartel product. Some even ran side routes while still filing clean reports. And every one of them, Salgado added, was positioned on or adjacent to a federal task force, which means they had clearance. Corinne clicked into a deeper folder. And that's not the worst of it. The room went still. She opened a new file. Project Holdback. A sealed archive hidden behind 3 layers of administrative clearance and a ghost identity authorizing its reactivation. Alana's voice was low. That's one of ours. Naomi frowned. Holdback. That's pre-2014. A failed asset rerouting protocol, right? Corinne didn't answer. Instead, she opened the file. The contents filled the screen in slowly unrolling pages, program descriptions, funding charts, internal memos between senior DEA officials, and tactical guidelines for field officers. The original intention was clear. Operation Holdback had been conceived as a deep interdiction protocol. Stage-controlled leaks of seized narcotics back into cartel circulation, tag them, and trace distribution channels to build intelligence webs from the inside. High risk, high reward, and heavily classified. It was supposed to have been shut down after it backfired during a Florida trial, when one of the tagged bricks re-entered the U.S. and killed 3 civilians in a crossfire. Publicly, the project was dismantled. Privately, the framework was mothballed. But the logs said otherwise. Funding was quietly reauthorized 5 years ago, Corinne said, through an anti-crime provision buried in the national enforcement budget. It was funneled through discretionary lines, signed off at the executive level by the prior DEA director, your predecessor. Alana's mouth drew into a hard line. He was compromised? No, Naomi said, flipping through the expenditure pages. He thought he was reviving the original version. Controlled product, controlled leaks. He had no idea it had already been hijacked. Salgado cursed under his breath. So they used federal money, rebuilt the system. But this time the product wasn't traced. It was laundered. The intelligence-gathering pretext was just a front. They turned the program inside out, Corinne said. Instead of hunting the cartel, they became the cartel's most useful tool. And they covered every move under the same clearance the DEA uses to protect counter-terror cases. No one questioned it because no one wanted to dig into classified corridors. Alana looked at the blinking name at the top of the screen. Marcus Velt, listed as the original system's architect. Then again, 2 years later, as a reassigned systems auditor, logged under the alias Michael Veras, a name never officially filed, but present in every operation where Xeno had been used to erase or reroute data. He's not just part of the network, Alana said. He built the engine. Naomi's voice was tight. And now he's waiting in Houston. You realize what that means? Alana nodded. He wants to be caught. Salgado raised an eyebrow. Why? Alana stared at the screen, at the wreckage of their system laid out in lines of digital confession. Because he doesn't think we'll do it. Because he thinks we'll hesitate. Because to bring him in, we'll have to expose all of this to the world. And we'll have to admit that the house wasn't just dirty. It was on fire, and no one noticed. Corinne looked at her then. What if he's right? Alana didn't blink. Then we burn it down ourselves and build it right. She turned to Naomi and Salgado. Assemble the strike team. Quiet. Full tactical prep. I want boots on the ground within 8 hours and blackout protocols in place. No leaks. We find that meeting point. We intercept. No more signals. No more ghosts. We bring Velt in alive. Naomi gave a short nod. And if he fights? Alana's voice was ice. Then we finish what he started. 3 weeks after the compound raid in Houston, Alana Brooks stood beneath the vaulted rotunda of the Capitol, her right hand raised before a wall of cameras, surrounded by silence. Not the kind born from hesitation, but reverence. Every seat in the Congressional Oversight Chamber was filled. Behind her, the Justice Department's seal loomed, flanked by flags. Before her sat 13 members of Congress, bipartisan in name, but united in shock. The transcripts had circulated, the files had been decrypted, and the truth had finally surfaced. She lowered her hand, took her seat at the center of the witness table, and adjusted the microphone. My name is Alana Brooks, and I serve as Director of the Drug Enforcement Administration, she began, her voice steady, controlled. I come before this committee not just as a federal officer, but as the woman falsely arrested by 2 of our own. That arrest exposed more than misconduct. It exposed a network, one rooted not in ideology, but in quiet opportunism. This was not a rogue faction. This was the natural evolution of a failed policy that we let rot under red tape and silence. She opened the folder before her, thick with names, programs, and budgets misused. She spoke for nearly 2 hours, detailing Operation Holdback's original intent, the hijacking of its infrastructure, and how federal resources were turned into currency for traffickers hiding inside their uniforms. She outlined how Velt, the ghost inside the system, had revived Zeno from the inside and used it to bypass oversight for years. But when she reached the end, she set aside the folder. This wasn't just a structural failure, it was a moral one. Because for every file, there's a name. For every redacted line, there was a victim. And for every silence, we now have the responsibility to speak. The chamber was still when she finished. Then came the first round of applause. Then the second. It wasn't political. It was human. Mass arrests followed within the week. Federal marshals, internal affairs, and DOJ auditors swept through precincts across 6 states, executing sealed indictments that had been drafted the moment the files were authenticated. Some officers fled. Others surrendered without a word. In Baton Rouge, a local commander was found attempting to torch a locker room file cabinet before backup arrived. In Phoenix, 2 supervisors were arrested during roll call. The sweep moved without announcement or fanfare. Just precision. The DEA, backed by congressional emergency authorization, seized control of 6 precincts previously flagged for internal corruption. Commanders were replaced, databases frozen. Every officer recertified through background checks and psychological evaluations. More than 70 names on the USB were confirmed as active participants. 34 were indicted on federal conspiracy charges. 21 accepted plea deals in exchange for exposing the financial roots and laundering channels. 12 resigned before charges were filed. 6 committed suicide. Marcus Velt was one of the few to go quietly. He was arrested inside the basement of a private storage compound near Houston, a location buried beneath layers of shell companies and false rental names. The space was more than just a hideout. It was a digital command nest, surrounded by humming server towers, military-grade communications equipment arranged with obsessive precision, and 3 meticulously kept passports laid out on the desk before him, each bearing a different name and nationality. American, Panamanian, Serbian, all authentic, all used. He didn't reach for the compact firearm taped beneath the desk, didn't twitch toward the biometric deadbolt on the wall behind him, and didn't even flinch as the tactical team advanced through the narrow corridor with weapons drawn and orders clear. He simply remained seated, watching the arrival like it was a scheduled appointment, not the end of a criminal empire. His face was still, almost calm, the expression of a man who had planned for this moment and considered it inevitable. When Alana entered the room, stepping through the final door with her team flanking either side, he looked up from the folder in front of him and offered her a faint, knowing smile, one that landed without warmth but carried weight, like punctuation on a story he believed he had written. "You finally made it," he said, his voice dry from hours of silence, but deliberate and precise. "Took you long enough." She didn't return the smile. She stared at him for a long moment, not moving, not answering. Her eyes stayed on his, holding the weight of everything he had built and broken. Then, at last, she spoke, her voice calm but edged with steel. "You built a machine that devoured people," she said, her words landing evenly. "And you did it from inside an oath." Velt tilted his head slightly, his smile tightening at the corners. There was no denial, no deflection, only a quiet, deeply cynical certainty in his response. "No, I built a mirror, and I just kept it clean." Alana didn't offer a rebuttal. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped forward, crossed the final few feet to his desk, and reached down to pick up the ring of keys lying beside the passports, keys that unlocked his compound, his digital vaults, and his history. Without a word, she turned and handed the keys to the agents at her back, her voice low but absolutely firm. "Put him in black transport, no processing delay. I want him in federal isolation within the hour." The 2 agents moved in without hesitation. One secured his wrists with reinforced cuffs, the other searched him for hidden transmitters. Velt rose slowly to his feet, hands extended, movements deliberate and unhurried. Though he was now restrained and surrounded, he carried himself with the same calculated calm that had made him invisible for nearly a decade. As they began to lead him toward the exit, he turned his head slightly, casting one final glance toward Alana. His expression hadn't changed. Still composed, still smug, still convinced that the system would bend itself back to its shape without him. "The system will survive this, Director," he said, his voice quieter now, but still etched with that same unnerving certainty. Alana met his gaze, her voice steady and clear. "That's the point. Not the version you built, the one we fix." He didn't reply. And this time, when the door closed behind him, it sounded nothing like retreat. It sounded like closure. The corridor beyond the holding cell was quiet, lined with muted lights that cast long reflections across the polished floor. Alana walked its length without hesitation, her footfalls absorbed by the stillness of the space, her expression calm, but unreadable. There was no applause waiting outside, no team gathered to greet her with congratulatory nods or rehearsed praise. What followed Velt's arrest was not celebration. It was reconstruction. In the days that followed, her agency moved with uncommon speed. A task force made up of internal auditors, independent watchdogs, and federal IT specialists was deployed to dismantle every remaining shadow of Xeno's architecture. The system's hidden root protocols were not simply disabled. They were extracted, decrypted, documented, and incinerated under direct oversight. What was once buried under anonymity and old clearance codes now became the foundation of transparency reform. But Alana knew that removing the cancer wasn't enough. Something had to grow in its place. LEMARS was born not from policy, but necessity. A monitoring system with no central override, no manual entry loophole, and no access point controlled by a single badge or title. Designed collaboratively by whistleblowers, compliance experts, and forensic analysts, it was built to make sure no arrest, no evidence entry, no transfer, no disappearance would go unrecorded or unchallenged again. It was a system that demanded accountability at every layer. And for the first time in decades, that demand didn't just echo upward. It pressed inward. The name wasn't chosen in a boardroom. It was chosen by Alana alone. And when she sent the naming request through formal channels, she included a note. His name mattered. Let it be the one thing they never lose again. The system launched with full federal integration 2 months later. Naomi Kersey stood at the head of the new Office of Internal Shielding, appointed without opposition. The office's mandate stretched beyond review and discipline. It was charged with full operational autonomy, empowered to act on internal violations with the same authority as external crimes. Naomi's first move was immediate: a sweeping audit of every fusion task force formed under Operation Holdback or linked to its legacy. Her second move was quieter, but no less vital: reopening whistleblower cases previously dismissed or delayed under internal mismanagement. At her swearing-in ceremony, she stood at the same podium where Alana had once testified. She didn't speak long. She didn't need to. The files she held in her hands, thick with names and places and decisions that once went unchecked, spoke loud enough. Alana's work didn't end with the reforms. She visited the federal detention facility a few weeks later, not as a figurehead, but as a witness. Maddox and Calloway were held in separate units, their movements strictly monitored, their access to communication fully revoked. When she entered the interview chamber, they were already seated, their expressions hollow and braced for something she refused to give them: anger. She didn't sit across from them. She stood between the two divided windows and spoke with the quiet finality of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. "Whatever you thought this was," she said, her voice steady and without indulgence, "it's finished. The network is gone. The cartel distribution you helped shield has been severed. Your allies, every last one of them, have either turned themselves in, cut deals to survive, or vanished into the same systems you thought you owned. Velt has been processed, stripped of every credential, and isolated. And the program you used to hide your work, Xeno, isn't just disabled. It's gone. Gone without a backup, gone without a reboot option, gone without a key." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward. She simply looked them in the eye, one by one, and let silence weigh down what little they had left. "No one's coming for you," she added. "No signal, no extraction, no fix." Calloway looked away, eyes vacant. Maddox stared at her, face twitching with resentment. He no longer had the strength to voice. Whatever power they once carried, the quiet, corrosive kind that moved unnoticed, had dissolved in the face of what they never believed would come. She left them there, seated behind the reinforced glass, with no response to give and no lie to cling to. When she walked out of the detention wing, a quiet buzz rose at the security gate. A camera crew stationed nearby caught her exit. They didn't call her name, didn't shout questions. They simply recorded her in motion. A woman walking out of a place where truth had been silenced for years, carrying nothing but herself and the certainty that it would be silenced no more. The footage ran that night on every major network, not as a breaking story, but as a final chapter. Months later, sunlight poured into the atrium of the newly reformed DEA training facility, casting soft, warm light across the polished floor where rows of recruits stood at attention. The quiet strength of the space wasn't in its architecture, though the renovations had modernized every corner. It was in what the building now represented. This was no longer a place where outdated systems were preserved under tradition. It was a space reclaimed, repurposed, and rebuilt on the lessons earned at great cost. The atmosphere was focused and solemn, not heavy with ceremony, but with the kind of clarity that only comes when justice is no longer a promise, but a practice. At the front of the hall, standing beneath the revised federal seal that now bore the words accountability, oversight, integrity, Alana Brooks stepped up to the podium with calm purpose. She faced the room, not just the rows of future agents, but the reality of what it meant to wear a badge in the world they now lived in. She didn't speak from notes. She didn't need a prepared statement. Everything that needed to be said lived in the truth that had finally been brought to light, and in the quiet knowledge that this time the system would remember what it had once tried to forget. "I'm not here to welcome you," she began, her voice composed and unwavering, shaped by the experience of having confronted the very walls that once shielded the truth. "I'm here to remind you that this agency doesn't exist to grant power. It exists to carry responsibility. The moment you put on this uniform, you are not above the law. You are beneath its full weight." She let her gaze move slowly across the room, not to intimidate, but to make sure they understood that silence would no longer protect the wrong people. The years of impunity had ended. The reforms weren't just policies. They were active, living systems that followed every action and demanded accountability from every corner. "We've rebuilt this place," she continued, her tone steady and grounded, "not just to look new, but to be new. The days of unchecked authority, buried audits, and whispered immunity are gone. What we do now, we do under a light that doesn't blink. If you're here for the right reasons, that light will protect you. If you're not, it will expose you." There was no applause. There was no need for it. The weight of what had been fought for was present in the room, carried not just in her words, but in the silence that followed them, respectful, honest, and unshaken. Behind her, a screen came to life with images that spoke louder than speeches ever could. The first frame showed her niece, seated in a classroom, smiling easily as she leaned over her desk to share something with a friend. Her world, once threatened by the reach of a system built on silence, now moved with the confidence of one restored by truth. The next images showed precincts that had once been tainted, now reorganized, repopulated by officers working under new leadership, each case logged, each action reviewed, each uniform earned. Then came the quiet footage of those who had once stood above scrutiny, now led away in cuffs, their roles reversed, no longer shielded by titles or history. In the final frame, Naomi Kersey stood before a newly installed LEMARS terminal, her hand hovering over the activation key as the system came online across the country. The screen didn't show celebration. It showed function, clean, constant, and incorruptible. Alana left the stage without ceremony, walking through the corridors that no longer echoed with institutional unease, but instead carried the presence of real, structured change. She passed agents, analysts, and clerks who nodded with the calm recognition of what she had done. Not out of reverence, but respect. She moved with quiet assurance through the building and stepped into her office, where the view outside had not changed, but the world beyond it had. The desk was cleared, not out of emptiness, but readiness. She didn't fill the walls with awards or photographs. She kept the space practical, clean, focused. The work wasn't something you framed. It was something you continued. A quiet knock at the open door preceded a junior staffer entering, placing a sealed file on her desk before offering a respectful nod and stepping away. There was no tension in the gesture, no urgency in the delivery. The file was a finalized audit report confirming that the last department under investigation had passed with full compliance. The reforms had not just been installed, they were working. She opened the folder, read the first few lines, and then slowly closed it, setting it down with quiet satisfaction. There were no anomalies, no red flags, no disappearances, just a closed case. Just proof that the system was no longer protecting predators or erasing mistakes, but correcting course with the consistency and visibility it had always owed to the public. Outside, the city moved forward under a clear sky, the sounds of daily life steady and uninterrupted. For the first time in years, Alana allowed herself to breathe without waiting for what might come next. There was no other battle waiting in the shadows. There was no unseen adversary circling for another strike. The machine that had once consumed from within had been dismantled, and in its place stood something worth trusting. She looked out the window, not for answers, not for direction, but simply to acknowledge what it meant to arrive at the end of something that once seemed impossible to stop. Justice had not come with a moment of triumph. It had come with persistence, with risk, with truth that refused to stay quiet. And now, finally, it was done. Not paused, not pending, finished. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.